The Joe Rogan Experience is too big to fail. You've heard news of Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, and many others demanding that Spotify cancel him for what they consider to be misinformation shared on his podcast. But so far, it seems like Spotify is siding with Joe. But I'd like to have a real talk about canceled comedians. Cancellations are often discussed as a culture, as a consciousness of people's gradual shift towards sensitivity and censorship. But that's elevator conversation. I've created something called the Cancel Continuum, but in this case, it's the Canceled Comedian Continuum. It's a bit long, I'm working on the title. But just to give you an example, continuums are often used in therapy to guide someone along the process of how emotions become actions. At first you're annoyed, then frustrated, upset, irate, furious, and then enraged. It's a process that identifies the gray areas, and this one in particular is about anger. Mine is about the degree of canceled comics. Accused, wrongfully accused, rightfully accused, disgraced, and exiled. Dave Chappelle was accused of being transphobic for his jokes on his previous Netflix specials. But in my opinion, much of the hate that Dave gets is a product of his storytelling. The weight behind his words have little to do with his celebrity and size, and more to do with the fact that he is a generational thinker. So what he has to say about anything means something. Aziz Ansari was wrongfully accused of sexually assaulting a woman he went on a date with. She detailed the story she released to the press, not the police, but the press, about Aziz coercing her into sexual favors. But the more the story circulated, the more members of the media saw it as a tale of a bad date and not an assault. Aziz suffered some criticism, but ultimately most of the public sided with him. The problem with being wrongfully accused is the fact that a small segment of the public won't follow the story to its conclusion. So for some, Aziz is no better than Harvey Weinstein. Which brings us to the rightfully accused Louis C.K., whom at the height of Harvey Weinstein's Me Too disaster was accused of sexual misconduct. I'll spare you the details, but several female comedians came forward and revealed Louis' strange request. He was basically asking these women to out in their dressing rooms. Now, a large part of the Me Too movement was about leverage, which Louis acknowledged himself when he commented about the accusations. The power I had over these women was that they admired me, and I wielded that power irresponsibly. He was then dropped by HBO, FX, and Netflix. But years later, he's back on the road where he openly discusses his cancellation. And now, the disgraced Delia. A series of tweets, DMs, and emails confirmed he was grooming many underage girls. All sorts of Pied Piper tactics and angles via text message to 16 and 17-year-old kids, soliciting nude pictures, etc., etc. He was also dropped by Netflix and CAA, one of the largest talent agencies in the world. But shortly after the news came out, many of his comedian friends addressed their dissatisfaction towards him. You can find videos of Theo Von, Bobby Lee, Brian Callen, Tom Segura, and Andrew Schultz either taking jabs at Chris or literally crying over the sheer disappointment of his actions. And since the comedy scene is an industry of allegiances, you'll find that if a comedian doesn't have the stature of a Louis C.K. or Dave Chappelle, people's honesty comes out immediately. If you can do very little for others in this industry, you best tread lightly. You will be canceled within a circle of amoral people, which is funny when you think about it. Delia released an apology February of 2021, a year after his absence. He now continues to put out episodes of his podcast, Congratulations, where he uploads the visuals to YouTube. But would you like to know who isn't allowed on YouTube, or Patreon, or PayPal, or Twitter, and many other platforms? That's the exiled Owen Benjamin.
I agree with what he said. What he said was there was someone that he knew, someone who works in Hollywood, that had a 3-year-old that they were turning trans.
Right.
And he said that that was child abuse. That was what led
I don't disagree
to
with
his
that.
crazy situation.
Like Chappelle, this was all over something he said. But unlike Dave, it wasn't on stage, but on Twitter. Comments against David Hogg, who at the time in 2018 was a sympathetic figure, and many, many tweets with the N-word. Owen took liberties with language excessively around that time. He basically doubled and quadrupled down time and time again, issued no apologies, and like Delia, was released from CAA. But eventually, worse than that was his banning from the world-famous Comedy Store in West Hollywood. No comedians cry for Owen. He either doesn't exist or he's the butt of a random joke on a podcast. But let me make this simple for you. A majority of comics think Owen Benjamin is a crazy person, period. Joe Rogan has taken several shots at him as recent as a few weeks ago. He doesn't like Owen, and Owen is very open about his feelings towards Joe. When he was officially canceled, he began a series of live conversations with his audience, with topics ranging from the moon landing to the Holy Trinity, and of course, Flat Earth. When YouTube got rid of him, he centralized his content on his website, and now, in 2022, he's currently funded by the support of his sizable audience. Eventually, if enough musicians lean on Spotify, they may be forced to cut ties with Rogan, though I'd imagine that list would have to be a who's who of people. But no matter what happens, he's too big to fail and uncancelable. If Spotify announces his release, it would only strengthen his audience and he wouldn't skip a beat. Lack of access is what you need to consider when it comes to canceling. If you're high on the pecking order, it's gonna take a lot more than a bad joke and an odd fetish to cancel you within the comedy circle. Delia lost access. Owen Benjamin lost access, plus the respect of his peers, and a whole lot more. Because the comedians that are canceled are the ones you don't hear about.
I don't hate Rogan. I just think Rogan's a 5'6" guy, looks like a thumb, and he thinks he's a ninja. Why would I hate a guy like that? Rogan is dim. Dude, he's a fucking retard. Sorry, that was mean. That was mean. I shouldn't have said retard. He's mentally disabled. I don't think you understand the psychology of a 5'6" man who thinks he's a ninja with no hair. But Joe is so functionally stupid.